The MDX binary model is composed of mesh groups called geosets by Warcraft III. Each geoset has one and only one material that is wrapped onto the surface of that geoset. Inside the material, there will be one or more layer blocks. The reason the bug was introduced was that a developer prior to the August 2022 ranked ladder release that publicly broke this, and perhaps prior even to year 2022 behind closed doors, changed the concept of material and layer for the Reforged HD graphics. From the outside, I can only guess as to the reasoning, but it was probably a matter of improving the Reforged graphics render performance. After the August 17, 2022 patch release, each material in a Reforged HD model uses generally only one layer in most cases, where the layer is able to define the various texture assets used by its shader inputs. Prior to the August 17, 2022 patch release, this concept was different, and each material was basically a shader usage, and each layer inherited from the 2002 design could have one and only one linked texture asset. So on the older 2020 Reforged model format, each material usually had 6 or so layer chunks as a roundabout way to reference the 6 texture assets needed. It is a case of spaghetti code, and I understand that it may be a stress to fix, but if you fix this in the correct way once robustly, putting the engine back into a fully working state for both classic and Reforged graphics as things were from the release of Reforged for years until August 17, 2022, then it will be rewarding for you in the sense that you would probably never hear from us again on this issue. There may be some spaghetti code here, unless I am missing a detail. Reforged decided to store the classic graphics in the Reforged game format, version 1000+, even though the Reforged game supports the Frozen Throne format, version 800. Because Reforged erased Frozen Throne from user computers and replaced it and claims to support all 20 years of custom maps. This questionable decision has been true since the release of Reforged years ago. If I could have it my way to spend idle time cleaning up the game design of Reforged, I would probably change the game so that all of the classic assets were stored in the classic format, version 800. But I'm assuming your team is not permitted that kind of relaxation to do clear, rested thinking and revisit fundamental decisions from Reforged. Given that the classic assets are expressed in the Reforged format, it takes a lot of technical expertise not to break stuff when we change something such as the Reforged format change on August 17, 2022, that broke classic assets. The spaghetti code and the overlap is bad enough that even though there was a new format version introduced on August 17, 2022, version 1100, the legacy support added on August 17, 2022, inherited the bug instead of retaining its previous working behavior. So, the game engine continues to load version 1000 and version 800 files as if to be backwards compatible. And indeed it should be backwards compatible, otherwise all existing custom games would break. But despite the game continuing to load 1000 and 800, the new bug that breaks classic assets also breaks assets in the 1000 and 800 format. This happens because of the spaghetti code sharing between the new and legacy format support. As such, it is worth keeping in mind that my personal wishful thinking that it would be nice if classic assets were stored in the classic format version 800 from 2003 would not even solve the problem because the game code is to that point where the old stuff is broken by the new stuff. Now, in this world where we have 5 formats to support, they all share code, and the shared code was broken by patch 1.33 release on August 17, 2022. This shared code pipeline changed because the concept of layer can now have up to 6 textures: diffuse, normal, ORM, emissive, team color, and reflection. Previously, the concept of layer had only one texture in both of the previous asset formats that existed until August 17, 2022. As such, in the historical, classical version of the MDX format, the binary chunk KMTF previously described a flipbook of many textures over time, who were all tasked with replacing the one and only one texture of a layer object in an animated way based on a timeline. Now, with the concept of layer supporting up to 6-in-1 textures for its Reforged shader inputs ever since the August 17, 2022 patch, this means that the KMTF block must have special handling that was not previously part of its design. The special handling allows the flipbook of textures through time logic to apply to any of the 6 texture designations in the layer. In theory, it works on reforged models like the enraged elemental Nela and berserk elemental Nelby creeps in the reforged asset mode. However, as mentioned previously, the classic models are loaded through the same shared code pipeline and indeed stored in the same newer asset format. So, due to the nature of the change, the classic models can declare each of the 6-in-1 components of a layer, but the only one used in classic is the first diffuse value. Unfortunately, in a way that I was never able to fully determine just from looking at the game, something went wrong in this August 17th, 2022 patch regarding the way that the new code skips over the nil values of the 6-in-1 texture designations for a classic model layer. It makes sense that this code would be brittle, because it is trying to shoehorn the old KMTF concept that applies to the entire layer into the new format that could potentially have multiple KMTF blocks in one layer on Reforged. As a user, the something that went wrong manifests itself in the form of the KMTF chunk being entirely ignored on Classic. Maybe the chunk is applied to some Reforged-only copy of the code in an erroneous way, or maybe it is skipped mistakenly by a loop that used to read all remaining animated blocks for layer until layer chunk overarching size is consumed. Perhaps such a loop now broke and skips over the KMTF because of its attempt to work around the need for supporting repeating KMTF now. Or maybe there is a classic KMTF variable that exists in the code and is sometimes written to, but never used. And instead the reforged multi-KMTF my-enum name diffuse map value is read from on classic and is often blank, because ideologically these two variable storages should have been one and the same. I cannot know. I do not have your code. Aside, experimentation with the current game release suggests that if we change a classic asset to declare each of the other unused reforged components of a layer, instead of omitting them inside the binary data, then in some cases this will cause previously lost KMTF blocks to be retained and used again visually by the otherwise bugged code. This might not be useful information, however, because it is not a reasonable solution to start changing individual classic assets to include reforged metadata to work around a bug. It appears that during the PTR, when we reported this issue to your team multiple times in multiple places, someone attempted to fix the issue by adding special handling for certain assets in certain places in the game data so that specially selected classic assets would stop discarding the KMTF block and then render properly. This has the impact of appearing to fix the most basic cases, but anyone who uses the game engine for longer periods of time ends up falling back to the realization that the issue is not fixed in general. Although this may be time-consuming to work through this legacy code, I suggest doing it correctly and fixing the fundamental problem so that all assets, regardless of their reforged or classic art data, and regardless of their reforged or classic format in which the data is stored, would never discard a KMTF chunk from a layer when parsing. And then all of the graphics would look visually how they did in all game modes of Reforged, prior to when the bug was introduced on August 17th, 2022. In case it helps to inspire you, I can assure you that as the developer of the open-source Retera Model Studio third-party application that parses and previews these same assets, last fall in conjunction with the August 17, 2022 patch release, I was able to upgrade my own tool to solve the parsing of these assets for all versions in all cases. In this way, we are fortunate to know that regardless of whether you have time to fix the bug fully, or if you intend to leave Warcraft III in a broken state forever because of budget and time limitations, either way, we will always know that it was technologically possible for you to fix the game at the lowest level to handle all asset versions in all cases, even if it was not financially possible. Thank you.
Hi there. Is there a project you're working on?
I know more than you.
All right.